Phoenician and Mediterranean origin, historic receptive migrants of any foreign community, and privileged geographic location with natural reserves. It's a geostrategic asset that some authors at present accuse of amnesia, but that stands out for being the only country that have defeated the Israeli forces thanks to Hezbollah resistance, a people that is reborn like the phoenix bird, and that now confronts disagreements among those who have exercised power and impedes the constitution of a new government after parliamentary elections held last May. This situation has caused internal war and is combined outdoors with tensions of Israeli occupation forces in a mutation of correlation of forces in view of a possible assault of the United States and its allies. Is there a risk of going to the abyss? What role does it play in the Near East? Is there a possible armed conflict with Israel? Could the Syrian war move to this territory, considering that Israel will always like war to keep its weapons industry and will always use the excuse of border insecurity? What is the United States' role in this case? Lebanon is our critical move today. We start looking actors and last events. As always, you are with us. Let's talk first of how things are indoors in order to understand what is happening outdoors. Impossible formation of a government since May 24, 2018, economic crisis, political forces like Chi and Hezbollah movements that make part of this delicate panorama warn that the fact that the first minister is unable to compose a cabinet is imminent. There is malaise in the streets. In fact, a new strike was made this year by the workers, and the workers of Beirut and public hospitals joined the strike in different localities, and Baalbek, Majid, Sidon, and Beirut itself. We have two basic requirements: the reduction of the price of fuel and health coverage we all need. We are talking in the name of all Lebanese who are suffering and are unfavored. Let's go to Lebanon's profile, a country marked by diversity, as we said, and with strategic coast because of its proximity to Syria, Palestine, and the Mediterranean. Lebanon, officially the Lebanese Republic of Lebanon. It is located in west from Asia, next to the Mediterranean Sea. North and east has Syria, southeast and south Israel. West, it has the Mediterranean Sea. Its capital, the most populated place and main port, is Beirut, one of the most important economic and most modern economic financial centers and one of the most avant-garde centers in the Middle East, known as the Switzerland of the Near East Asia in the 70s, and has a merger of relations that live peacefully. It was occupied by the Ottoman Empire until the 16th century, until the First World War. Many peoples lived in this territory: Phoenicians, Assyrians, Greeks, Romans, Europeans, and Arabs. With a little over 10,000 square kilometers divided in 8 governances, it has a population of over 7 million. It's a parliamentary confessional republic. By law, the president of the republic must be held by a Maronite, Christian Maronite, the first minister Muslim Sunni, and the president of the National Assembly by a Shiite. It has a few natural resources, scarce reserves of coal, phosphate, and copper. It has no oil, but it does have refineries. Trade is its main activity with 67% of the GDP, and farming represents 12% of that GDP. In order to find other data, to have an integral view, as we always do in Critical Move, two web pages. First, we have Al-Majadin, this digital web page under the title Lebanon does not want war with Israel. This was warned by General Abbas Ibrahim. The Chief of General Security of Lebanon, Abbas Ibrahim, confirmed that Israel wants war even if it's not ready or able to carry it out, or other aspects. He said that the threat made by terrorist cells has fallen significantly, but he does not believe they have disappeared. Russia still plans to return the displaced Syrians after having agreed with the international community on certain aspects. Security and stability in Lebanon are only the responsibility of Lebanese, in a clear call for non-interference in exclusively internal matters. I now go to Hispan TV under the title Israel Unleashed Syrian Conflict to Disintegrate the Middle East. In a participation made in the International Conference of Defense and Security of the West Rani, Mahmoud al-Shar, the Minister of Defense of Syria, underlined that terrorist groups like al-Nusra, the self-proclaimed Fatah Sham movement, and Daesh attack Syria because this is what the Zionist regime of Israel wants. Terrorists, it says, planted disagreement and sectarian conflicts to unleash the war in this country and weaken the axis of resistance composed by Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah, a Islamic resistance movement of Lebanon. He added that several countries of the region supported these hostile policies against Damascus and are the pawns of Washington and Tel Aviv. This was declared by Al-Shawa in this conference. Now I'll go to telesurtv.net, our own webpage. And the article is written by Pablo Chofre Leal, a Chilean journalist and writer, international analyst. He has several degrees on topics related to Latin America, Middle East, and Maghreb. The publication is dated September 8 under the title War of the 33 Days, Defeat of Zionism in the Hands of Hezbollah. At times where the Mediterranean is still suffering the aggression of Western countries and armed terrorist groups financed by the United States and Zionist partners, the correlation of forces have turned in benefit to the resistance, a scenario that has helped recover Syrian sovereignty in a large part of its territory. The consolidation of the military and political importance of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the intensification of the aggressive behavior of Israel against Lebanon and its criminal policy against the Palestinian people. The world was able to see that the Israeli regime and an army that believed it was the most powerful with the most state-of-the-art weapons, where they were proud to show their weapons, showing a superiority, had to leave after the success of Hezbollah. The author is reminding us of a matter that we referred in our editorial. The only country able to defeat the occupation forces of Israel, thanks to the resistance and organization of Hezbollah. How is the inner political situation in Lebanon? What is the role of the Hezbollah movement? The resistance it plays. We want to review this to understand what is happening indoors and why it cannot form a government, and we will find out after this pause.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Webpage El Orden Mundial says Lebanon and Turkey, two ways of escape of the Syrian conflict, a publication of October 10th, 2016. It has some data on this move called Internal Move and Geostrategic Order in the Middle East. Religion and instability, inseparable terms in the Near East. Are there different stabilities in Lebanon and Turkey? This is new because it has been a matter of discussion in the Near East and a large part of the world since immemorial times. The variety of beliefs that coexist in Lebanon have created a little tension in this country. Only in the last century, both civil war and confrontations with Israel have been the main cause of a broad diversity of religious groups. In this country of Phoenician origin and Arab, with a varied and diverse religions and ethnic groups that has been in war in the last 15 years, the religious power has determined the social-political future that has contained frictions and tensions that are so complex in the Middle East, where Lebanon has a key role because of its location and history. In terms of governance, since the independence from France in 1943, the President of the Republic will always be a Christian Maronite, the First Minister Sunni, and the President Parliament Shiite. In this legislative organ, there will be 50% parity between Muslims and Christians, and the same happens in the national political arena. The fact that the power has changed in successive generations of families. As of the murder of the First Minister Rafik Hariri in 2005, a businessman that wanted to rebuild Lebanon, especially Beirut, to make it reborn as a financial center, there was the Cedar Revolution and several movements. On the 14th March movement, and the patriotic movement of current President Michel Aoun defends the current status quo, and another movement, a Sunni party of the son of Hounini and Maronite forces, Lebanese Falange, and the neoliberal parties. In the legislative elections held in last May, the Free Patriot movement almost doubled its participation in Congress from 15 to 28 in 20. First Minister Saad Aidi, son of the murdered minister, was unable to group its voters. Hezbollah, the Party of God, an armed forces that started in 1992 with the arrival of Hassan Nasrallah in power, that today is a capital agent in parliament. Last elections showed that the new parties have had trouble to break the classic circle, overcome corruption, and with public services laws are the current challenges of the current government and the future after they overcome stagnation. We will now listen to our guests that are connecting from Spain, from Valencia, Carles Martinez, international analyst and journalist, and from Bilbao, we have the pleasure to introduce Iñaki Orestarazo, international political analyst. Thank you very much both for being here. I want to start with Iñaki Orestarazo. Regarding the confirmation of the government, what are the problems to understand this situation? Do you believe that in the short term there is some possibility of resolving the crisis? That is nothing new? If I see a solution to the crisis in the short term, well, we hope there is. Of course, this has been going on for 8 months, since May, and there have been several attempts, many events. In any case, there was also a recent strike. It's unbelievable that 8 months have passed without forming a new government. It seems that in the end, since they had elections in May this year, the former year, 2018, an important change happened in the correlation of forces in favor of Hezbollah and the most progressive sectors, 8 of March movement. Alilia and the right-wing groups do not want to accept this new relation of forces. And they are setting problems, and they want to criticize Hezbollah. They're having pressure from Saudi Arabia, the United States. The main obstacle has been the fact that Hezbollah is right to demand that their allies, some Sunnis that have had important votes in the elections, also be represented in the government. So this is one of the apparent obstacles they are using to prevent from reaching an agreement. But behind all this is the fear that Hezbollah, that was the most voted party, together with Amal, is the most powerful coalition inside parliament, together with Maronite of Michel Aoun. They make up more than half a majority, and they are entitled to have more weight in government as well. So there are problems there. There has been this strike where they demanded improvements of life conditions, because the truth is that the economy is very critical at this time, and Other changes they required were licit changes, as well as the formation of the government that can have positive solutions to improve life conditions. It surely would. So all these pressures and all the situation that is unsustainable it seems that they are making promises. We hope a new government comes, and we hope the government is formed after 8 months. Thank you. I would now like to ask Carlos Martinez, another international analyst from Valencia, if the Lebanese policy is a closed sphere. How do you see it? Well, this is a battlefield between the imperialist axis and that
pero también el Líbano ha sido objeto continuamente de agresiones por parte de la entidad sionista y por parte también de los terroristas de Al Qaeda y Daesh, que son aliados de facto.
It has Al Qaeda.
Todo esto ha hecho que un pequeño país sea objeto de tensiones importantísimos. Ha estado sometido a un continuo conflicto bélico con Israel, ahora tiene que defenderse de los genocidas terroristas. Eso se le suma a la gran llegada de refugiados que han...
This adds to the arrival.
Han aumentado casi una tercera parte de su población. Ha hecho un esfuerzo inmenso en Líbano, no reconocido y no apoyado simplemente, por acoger a las personas que huían de la agresión contra Siria. Todo esto, lógicamente, hace que sea un corte muy clavable ese país, ese Estado, esa sociedad.
Very difficult, the formation of the government, and there's also the intervention of the totalitarian Saudi regime that has always been against Lebanon. It's a punished society. And France created it to protect its interests. Right now, the French state is interfering according to its interests. It is funny how the population demanded better conditions, and France and Israel are now supporting the anti-imperialist axis. But their policy, the West has foreseen for Syria and for Lebanon a government of terror similar to that of the end of the 30s. And they have chosen to oppose Hezbollah as a matter of life and death because they knew that Israel and France were losing their power. Regarding the matters of religion, and that totalitarian ideology usually use terrorists. Now I go back to Iñaki to ask how did the war mark Lebanon? Because as we said, this country still has the footprint of the civil war that lasted 15 years from 1975. Some authors accuse Lebanon of a space and physical amnesia that determines other kinds of amnesia because the reconstruction does not resort to war or victims. I want to ask you if this is a fair statement or what opinion do you have in this sense? Yes, I think that civil war between social classes and religious groups marked the Lebanese process. I think that we can see in the structure, and it came from 1933, since the independence of the Lebanese state from France, and later with the Civil War of 1975-1990, this became more acute because of the confrontation among religious groups and sectarian groups that had different class components. Well, it has a large incidence because we see how structures of the country, political structures, military structures of the country work. And the administrative structures, laws, elections, etc., if does not depend on social sectors of either side, but they make distribution of seats in the different regions or administrations according to a census that was made in 1932, where an analysis was made of the compositions of religious groups, Sunnis, Shiites, and Christian groups, and therefore the distribution was made upon that. The distribution depended on how many seats should each religion have. For example, they made a division of half of the seats, 64, I think, to Christians and other 64 to Muslims. And in 1932, the majority were Christians. 51% of the population was Christian. But today, the majority is Muslim. 60% is Muslim, and Christians are only 40%. And if, or at least Muslims, 55% and 5% trust. So the composition of religions has changed, and in spite of that, they still established a distribution of seats according to religions in the different territories and administrations. This brings along many problems. It would be reasonable to stop that a priori distribution of seats and rather by territory, and the majority parties should have more seats and minority parties less votes and less seats. But the distribution is made according to how many seats there are. If there's a total of 8 seats in a given territory, 5 correspond to Christians and 3 to Muslims, to give you an example. So Muslims just have to cope, even if they are majoritarian, they have to cope with those 3. Therefore, there is a complex structure and unreasonable structure that blocks the composition of the administration. In fact, Hezbollah is the party that was most voted by far. Then I think came the party of Michel Aoun, and then Aridi, and then Ahmad's party. Well, there is a majority that, according to the votes, they have much less presence than the votes would say. So that on one side. So there is no real representation of the forces that exist in Lebanon. And on the other hand, with the religious structure, this is more complex yet, because the president of the government must be Sunni, the president of parliament must be Shiite, the president of the republic has to be Christian Maronite, and in the army structure, the same thing happens. According to each structure, the commander has to be one or other religion. The different administrations are also distributed by religions, etc. So the government also has to have a proportion equal to parliament. But they establish a series of instruments control instruments. Perhaps because of fear of repeating the civil war, the majorities in the government, at least for important topics, must be above 2/3. So there could be 1/3 of blockade regarding important decisions. This makes very difficult to reach agreements and take decisions. This is a very complex operation, very difficult and not efficient, that does not represent the real forces, etc. And then there are groups, for example, that are law or have no religion, new groups that have very difficult representation and must go through a series of other groups with the territorial divisions, allegedly according to the majority of religions. Even if you are in a territory, of course you enter in that block of religion. So everything is very complex. Hezbollah has said that there should be political and structural changes. There are other small parties that have proposed this also. But in any case, in the last elections, there has been a small progress in the sense that besides the distribution by religions of all the territories or administrations, they go with the majority, and this time they consider the proportion. But the proportion combined with the distribution, the prior distribution of a certain amount of seats established for each religion makes things complex. They have improved a little with these elections, but there is still no real representation of the true composition of forces and the true relation of forces in the country. As I said, the relation of forces have been expressed as we can see in favor of March 8, that is anti-imperialist, in favor of Syrians against Israel, for the equal conditions, struggle against corruption, etc. The representation is majoritarian, but it should be more so, and proportions of different groups are not well represented. It's a chaos. Thank you, Iñaki, for this illustrative explanation regarding the internal politics and the structure that you were calling complex. I would like to ask Carlos, in the final part of this segment, if Lebanon is a geostrategic asset, Carlos. One of the countries that are not subject to Washington are a strategic goal or target because it borders with Israel. We know that Israel distorts the region and has a permanent conflict with its neighbors and its own population. In the last years, it has been a very important target because it's a neighbor, allied, and shares history with Syria. We must all know that Lebanon has supported the legitimate government of Syria against the terrorist aggression, and Lebanon has also been subject of attacks from Al-Qaeda and Daesh. We must also remember that Lebanon is one of the few countries that expelled the U.S. Marines from its territory. Hezbollah made an attack for which the United States decided to abandon Lebanon. And since then, the successive U.S. governments and spy agencies have pressed Lebanon and never forgave Lebanon. It also considers that the Christian majority is anti-Semitic, but also opposed to the Sunnites. And all this considering, and even if what was said here about the representation of the different ethnic groups of Lebanon, regardless of that, we must also remember that Hezbollah has inside its area March 8th has integrated very important parts of this alliance with Christian and Sunnite forces. We must also remember that the main obstacle this date for the Lebanon government's formation is Sunnite politicians in the government, something that Hadidi is preventing. We must remember that Hadidi is Sunnite, and he is preventing that his own members be part of the government. Most important, as any part of the world, is the political position that each voter has. And today in Lebanon, in spite of everything that was said here, the majority of the population is anti-imperialist and anti-Zionist. And this is creating internal tensions that are being supported from abroad to unstabilize a government that should have a majority of members that are anti-imperialist. Iñaki Urestarazo and Carlos Martinez, thank you very much for being with us and explain your vision of this critical move. Israeli forces, according to what Carlos Martinez said, Israeli forces accuse Hezbollah of building a broad network of tunnels to penetrate in Israeli territory. And based on this accusation, the Israeli forces have deployed an operation called North Shield to find this network of tunnels and block them at the same time. This has caused tensions and leads us to talk about disputes and alliances in the region. Lebanon has also warned we are ready to reply in case of a major aggression. Is there the possibility of reinstating a war in Lebanon? We will analyze the role of the United States in Lebanon. We'll be back after this pause.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
Estamos de vuelta con la jugada crítica que hoy versa sobre Líbano.
Today deals with Lebanon, internal policy and geostrategic role in the Middle East. The Syrian conflict that has involved half a dozen of international actors, has joined other parallel wars that surely will continue after this one, especially due to the role of Israel in the Middle East and its responsibility in trying to change the regional map, of course, according to its own interests and those of the United States and UK. Lebanon is one of the actors involved, so let's look at another context. The neighbor and pondered Israel that sees its interest in danger in the heights of Golan, a Syrian territory occupied by Israel, with an operation called North Shield, and threatens Lebanon and accuses Shiite movement Hezbollah of penetrating Israel through an alleged network of tunnels financed by Iran, according to several militaries of Israel. Recently, the Provisional Forces of United Nations, Israeli commanders showed tunnels but lack any location sign or that they were paid by the Islamic nation. The permanent representative of Israel before the United Nations denounced the situation and demanded a sanction. Last September, UN General Assembly, First Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, accused the Lebanese resistance of building a factory of weapons in Beirut and operate drones towards Lebanese territory. The recent Lebanese attacks have incorporated its missile technology. In the words of the Israeli head of state, General Gadi Eisekon, exercises a new technology are part of a massive training movement with its next confrontation with Hezbollah in Lebanon. He accused Israel of violating Lebanese Israeli airspace and waters. Minister of Foreign Affairs Hebron Bassina announced they're preparing a sanction in the United Nations in case of a systematic practice of defamation by Netanyahu. Bassi called the ambassadors credited in Lebanon to verify personally. Hezbollah is plays a key role in this move. The access of the hull from Lebanon to Iran is essential, and the permanence of Bashar al-Assad in this move is essential. We now have in our study Isabel Frender, lawyer, international analyst, expert in the Middle East and everything related to Palestine and Africa. Welcome, Isabel. We want to contribute something and want to ask you about the correlation of forces and the interest at stake. According to Israel, the tunnels we were talking about would have around 200 meters long and are under the wall of 130 meters that Israel is building on the so-called blue line, and 40 meters inside Israeli territory. I would like to ask you, are they trying to press? Is Israel trying to press, and what are the causes? What is happening in Lebanon is always related to Hezbollah resistance. This comes in the same package and is related to what is happening in Syria. Everything we have seen in Syria and the dignified success that the Syrian people and state have achieved, and also the withdrawal of the United States from that territory. This puts in doubt the role of Israel, which led to the visit aimed to calm Israel, the visit of Burton to Israel and Turkey, to tell them that U.S. interests in support of the Israeli state, the colonial state of Israel, and to tell them that the United States will always be together with Israel, because the expansion and imposition of Israel was supported by the project of division in the Middle East by ISIS that against hospitals under the title of human rights and protection and welfare of terrorists in their territory. Now comes the pressure on the role of Hezbollah. We're not only talking about the tunnels, because these tunnels, for us, we understand that this is a strategy of resistance from total Israeli occupation in Lebanon until its withdrawal, and we still have Sheba, territory that is rich in water and minerals that is still occupied by Israel. We must understand that we have Israel inside the Lebanese territory. So this panorama tells us that the correlation of forces has changed. After the war of 2006, we have seen that image stained. This plenipotentiary army in the Middle East territory. Right now, with the position of Hezbollah and Syria, Israel must think twice and 3 times how to attack 1 centimeter of Lebanese territory. So now they come with the economic pressure and declaring that certain Lebanese banks in Lebanon are involved in supporting Hezbollah and Iranian support. So external forces influence economic terms. And on the other hand, we see that this approach of Hamas, Palestinian resistance with Iran, with the support of Hezbollah, has turned the position of Palestinian resistance with new tactics in defense and to liberate Palestinian territory. We see this international pressure. Sometimes they talk about tunnels, other times they talk about financing, others they say that while Hezbollah exists in Lebanon with a protective role, para posicionarse en la zona de Hezbollah, vemos que todos estos elementos exógenos we see that all these external elements do not allow the formation of a new cabinet in Lebanon. Economic problems, de índole financiero, financial problems, etc. So this is what's happening in general. How are the relations with the United States considering the quota of each religious group in the executive? We're not talking about a religious group. We're talking about a correlation of forces. I heard the other guest was talking about numbers of different religious groups. In a certain way, in the last years, this has changed because we're no longer talking about a civil war between Christians and Muslims. We're talking de fuerza religiosa. Estamos hablando de fuerza que ejerce presión que forces that más bien presión de fuerza o al decir
posicionarse en cuanto a partidos
positions of political parties and political convictions in the region. For example, if we're talking of a majority of Christians and Muslims, both Shiite and Sunni, we're not talking about the religious powerful position like they talk about Sunnis that have the role of Saudi Arabia, for example, in Lebanon, or Iran with Shiite. Right now we see the largest party, which is that of President Aoun, and other Christian forces that support resistance, and more part of Sunnis with resistance, and others directly related to the other plan that was imposed in the zone that is manipulated by the United States through its ally in the zone, which is the Persian Gulf, namely Saudi Arabia. The indirect role of Israel through Egypt and Jordan to impose the regional plan, and the most important element, which is take over natural resources from Syria to the Lebanese and Palestinian coasts. In terms of internal policy, our guest Iñaki Restarazu said that the government structure is very complex and prevents representation and decision-making. Do you agree with that? Not necessarily, because, as I have said, the religious shade has reduced because there is a more political transcendence of the region. Lebanon is a sovereign state that does not obey to U.S. imposition or the interests of Israel in the zone, or it has the freedom and autonomy and thinks on the welfare of its neighbor country, Syria, that protects its natural resources, which are very interesting elements in the reason why this cabinet is not formed. These are purely regional economic interests. He who has the majoritarian position in cabinet will define this agenda in the future. Do you see a possible solution of this cabinet? It should be, because we have three essential factors that part of Lebanon is defending. First is the role of natural resources, gas exploration, and Lebanon as a member of
productor más bien de recursos naturales, de petróleo y de gas.
Of the countries that produce and exploit gas and oil. For example, McKinsey neoliberal that has the neoliberal package, talking about a solution, an economic solution. There are internal and external elements. From internal, we're talking about corruption and delay about 9 years. If we talk since 1988 to 2019, delay in the administrative field. And third, we're talking about McKinsey, who's coming with a solution to the economic problems in Lebanon and addresses any other topic in the package of the World Bank or the IMF. It even says that they want to legalize marijuana, but it doesn't talk about the oil exploration that could be a solution to Lebanese economic problems. These are signs we understand the governments that oppose the resistance Another central factor is Hezbollah's position as a resistance, which in Lebanon is legal, against any aggression or attack by Israel, and support to resistance, because if we go to the thought of Lebanon, there is a majoritarian force that believes that Israel is not a real state. The Lebanon considers Israel as an enemy until this time, and we believe there are violations to the rights of Palestinians in Lebanon. So this position is very different from what the world wants to place in Lebanon, like a religious problem and not an ideological, regional identity and existence problem. Thank you, Zoel, for your contributions. Let's go to our contributions. Several key matters tell us the community forces, ethnic diversity, Arabism, and Mediterranean location. After 8 months of elections that changed the correlation of internal forces in favor of Hezbollah, a solution should arrive after the crisis is overcome. Several attempts were made, and they still are. Hezbollah asked the ally who have votes have representation in the government and is claiming for transcendent changes, while external forces are trying the economic crisis to be favorable to attack the resistance. Outdoors, the final phase of terrorism in Syria and Russian air forces have changed the balance of forces in the region, and Lebanon and Hezbollah play an important role because legitimately they stop the colonialist fragmentation interest of Israel in the United States, not only in Lebanon but also in allied territories like Syria and Iran, and defends Palestine openly from Israel. This is historic. We cannot reduce the problem to religious problems, like Isabel Frangias was saying, but a matter of identity and defense of regional unity. We have ended our critical move. Thank you for being here. We will meet again tomorrow.